next finishing step is to apply a sealer coat to this project. And I think sealer coats are often overlooked by wood finishers, and I think it's really an important step. What a sealer coat does is it locks in any fibers of the wood that might be sticking up, and it seals in any pores and makes a nicer surface for the top coats to adhere to. Since I'm going to be using lacquer to finish this project, I'm going to use shellac. You can get it in a can or you can cut your own as the sealer coat. And shellac is a great sealer for any kinds of wood projects. It goes on easily. It doesn't take a lot of effort. As long as you've got a pretty nice brush, you can just pretty much wash it on there because it's so thin, and it dries very quickly. In about 30 minutes it'll be done. I can sand it and move on to the top coats. If you're going to use polyurethane as your top coats, you don't want to use shellac because polyurethane will probably just peel away from it. But as a sealer coat for polyurethane, what you can do is just take polyurethane and cut it half and half with mineral spirits, and it's a real watery liquid mixture, and you can just flood it on the surfaces. To get started with shellac as a sealer coat, I've got some denatured alcohol, and I like to condition my brush. In other words, just let it get soaked with the alcohol, and the alcohol is a thinner for shellac. So if I just lightly tap it against the sides, I can go directly to my shellac and just let it pick up some shellac. I always like to put my work project up on blocks so I can get to all surfaces easily, and I always start with the secondary surfaces and the bottoms and work my way to the top. And to apply shellac, again, you don't have to be too picky about it. Just kind of flood it all over all the surfaces, and remember, it dries quickly, so you can almost paint it on. Just want to go with the direction of the grain of the wood. I'm glad I applied that shellac to the runners inside earlier, because as you can see, you really can't get to them now. And you want to work pretty quickly because the shellac dries so quickly. Don't be overly concerned about any bubbles or little bits of dust that might be in there, because we'll just sand all of those off here in the next step. Now's the time in the finishing process when I like to bring out a lamp, and I like to shine it right across the surface. Now with that sealer coat on, you can see how the shellac has in spots, it's got kind of pooled up, and it really doesn't look that good. But that's okay because most of the surface has been covered just fine, and once I sand it down, you'll never know. If you're going to take the time to apply a nice finish to a project, get a good brush and save it. Make sure after you've applied the finish, you clean your brush. And for the shellac, I'm using alcohol, and I will just keep wiping it and cleaning it. And once I get this is already getting dirty with shellac, I'll dump this out and do it again. And finally, I will take this to the sink and apply soapy water and just clean it out this way. But it's really important to get all the shellac from the ferrule all the way up to the tops of the bristles, and you want to get all the finish out of there. And after I've cleaned it all out with alcohol, I'm just going to use some hand soap and work up a lather and work that into the bristles. This may seem like a lot of work and a little, silly thing to do, but really, brushes are expensive, and if you can treat them well, they can really last for years. Now that the sealer coat is applied and it's completely dry, I can use 320 grit in my power sander and sand it down. And for the edges, I'll just use 320 paper and do it by hand. You can be pretty aggressive sanding off the sealer coat, and if you just rub your hand along there, you'll feel and you can see that you're picking up a lot of dust, and that's not from the wood, that's from the shellac itself. I want to get this down to a nice flat finish so I don't see any glossy areas on the surface. Okay, now that I've got all of the sealer sanded off of all of the surfaces and I've removed all of the dust with tack cloth and by vacuuming it, I'm ready to go ahead and get started on the top coats using lacquer. But I want to start with the side surfaces because they're the ones that are most likely to run, and I really can't work on it horizontally. So to do that, I'm going to have to mix the lacquer, make a thinner consistency out of it. I have taken lacquer thinner and I've mixed it about 1 part lacquer thinner to 2 parts of lacquer, and it gets a thinner consistency, and I may end up putting an extra coat on the sides just to kind of even it out a little bit. One of the drawbacks to using lacquer is the odor. Even right now, smelling it is just horrendous. So if you're applying lacquer, it's really important to have some sort of breathing protection, which I will use. Again, with the lacquer, I want to also condition the brush. I want to let it pick up a lot of lacquer thinner, let it just soak in, and I'll tap off some of it and dip it right into the lacquer. And I want to really get a nice full brush of lacquer, let it drip a little bit, let it pick it up, and tap off a little on the sides, and I can get started applying it to the sides of the chest set. Lacquer dries pretty quickly, so when you apply it, you want to try to get it on as much as you can in one smooth motion. And I'll take it across the bottom like so. What you want to try to avoid is going back and forth over it as if you were painting. What will happen is it'll just create wrinkles and bubbles, and then you've got to deal with that later. And to apply the lacquer on the top surface, I want to make sure this brush is really loaded up. And I'll gently tap off some of the excess, but you want to have enough lacquer in there that you can make it from one side to the other in one swoop. So I'll start a little bit from the edge, and I'll just press down as I get closer to the opposite edge and let it come off. And for this little bit on the end, I'll come right back over like so. And then I'll overlap it slightly like so. Well, now I've got the first coat of lacquer applied all over. It just took a few minutes, and it looks awful. The first coats of lacquer will look really bad, and there's a lot of spots that it looks like it didn't stick to the wood, but that's all okay because all the other coats are just going to cover it up. Like I said earlier, you don't need to sand between coats of lacquer, but I do like to look and feel along the surface and to see if there's any major drips that have occurred, and if that happens, I can just knock them down really quickly with some 320 grit sandpaper. But I certainly don't need to sand the entire surface because the next layer of lacquer is actually just going to fuse into it.